Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm your host, Lois Lindstrom. We have an award-winning author of 10 nonfiction books. Our guest author, Dean King, is also the chief storyteller in two History Channel documentaries and a producer of its series, Hatfields and McCoys, White Lightning. Thanks for joining us, Dean.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Lois.
Dean's latest book involves the inspiring story of legendary outdoorsman and conservationist John Muir. John Muir spearheaded a quest to protect one of America's most magnificent landscapes, Yosemite in California, from predatory mining and the logging industry. His friend, Robert Underwood Johnson, the influential editor of Century magazine, agrees that he and Muir must protect Yosemite. And let's discuss our featured book, Guardians of the Valley, John Muir, and the Friendship That Saved Yosemite. And so my big first question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, Lois, there's a famous view at Yosemite Valley, right from the head of the valley. When you're looking in, you see El Capitan to the left and Bridal Veil Falls to the right. And my mother-in-law had rented a cabin there for my father-in-law's 70th birthday.
What a great spot.
Yeah. Well, I went in there and took in that view, and it did what it's supposed to do. The name of the view is Inspiration Point.
Inspiration.
And it just, the scale and scope of that view blew me away. And I'm an East Coast guy. I've been in the Appalachian Mountains a lot. I've been to Europe more than I've been to the West. But when I saw that, it really made me feel like I didn't know America the way I needed to, and that this was a way to explore that. The scope and scale of it was so magnificent. I just wanted to be there. Then I discovered that John Muir was really the physical embodiment of that place, and that our environmental movement really was born there, and that's what got the book kicked off.
And that's what's so wonderful about reading this book. It's almost like a history of the environmental causes in this country to read this book. In the prologue of your book, you have it features this photo that was taken May 17th, 1903, of President Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir at the Glacier Point in Yosemite Valley. And please explain this photo and to your book's content.
Well, of course, Theodore Roosevelt's our great environmental president who created the national parks and many wildlife refuges. And John Muir inspired him. And that was partly because Robert Underwood Johnson, Muir's editor at the Century magazine, told President Roosevelt when he was out on a whistle-stop tour for campaigning for election to his second presidency. Of course, he became president when President McKinley was assassinated, so he wasn't elected at first. He said, look, when you're out west, you love nature, you need to go to Yosemite National Park, and you need to look up John Muir and let him be your guide.
Yes, and what a great idea. How would you geographically describe Yosemite National Park? I mean, where is it located in California, and how far is it from San Francisco?
It's in the Sierra Nevada mountains, kind of in eastern California, and Muir walked there the first time he went from San Francisco, took a ferry over to Oakland and walked south and then out to the valley. It's about 150 miles. I'm not great on that exact detail, but you know, it's they took stage coaches out there back in the day. And
Okay. And of course, the mountains are just gorgeous behind there, right? They're right on the border of Nevada, right?
Oh, spectacular.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
Please describe the background of John Muir, because he was born in Scotland in 1838 and grew up in Wisconsin. And from reading your book, I learned he was a very self-reliant and was a mechanical genius. What else can you add to his story?
Well, his father was a strict evangelical Christian. He made Muir and Muir's siblings work on the farm from dawn to dusk. Whoa. And so Muir was very capable worker, and eventually, you know, he also learned the New Testament of the Bible at the end of a whip. He memorized the entire thing because his father made him. But he was a very bright guy, and the neighbors started realizing, hey, this kid's a smart kid. We need to get him some other books. So Muir started reading other books, and his father's like, no, only the Bible in this house, on my hours in particular. So he told Muir, look, if you're going to read, you're going to do it on your own time. So Muir invents a machine that pulls the legs out of the front of his bed, dumps them in a pan of cold water at 1 a.m. so he can get up and read books that aren't the Bible.
Oh my gosh.
So he was largely self-educated through that, learned mechanics and carved this machine, used clockwork and carved it out of wood. I mean, he was an amazing young man.
Yes, yes. Now tell us about his editor, Robert Underwood Johnson, who was the editor of the Century magazine in New York City in the 1890s and early 1900s. What was he like?
He was born in Centerville, Indiana, actually born in Washington, D.C., but raised in Centerville, Indiana. And he was also a precocious young man. At the age of 11, he told his parents, I'm going to go work at the train station. The train master wants me to come work there. And his father was a justice of the peace, said, what do you mean you're going to go work there? This is during the Civil War. And he said, yeah, I got a job. So he goes there and learns how to operate the telegraph machine. There's a telegrapher up the line who's sending out very quick telegraphs that nobody else can take down. Well, it's a young Thomas Edison. And here is Robert Underwood Johnson at the age of 11 communicating with Edison back and forth.
Incredible.
And it's during the Civil War, so he's also taking down very sad messages to families saying, you've lost a son in the war. He'd have to get on a horse, ride out to the family and tell them that.
Yes.
And when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, it was Johnson who was at the telegraph machine, took down that message and went out on the depot and made the announcement.
Isn't that amazing? What an amazing man. Well, let's talk about the evils of logging. Far too many gigantic trees were felled before people could stop the destruction in Northern California. I mean, how did John Muir react when he first saw the area near Yosemite, and then when he saw it 30 years later? What did he think about the trees, the beautiful sequoia trees being cut down?
Well, you have to remember this was the age of Reconstruction, of industrialization, the transcontinental railroad over a long period of time. He was there from about 1870 to, well, 1914 when he died. But so he saw a lot of change going on, and the nation wasn't so concerned about preserving anything. It thought its natural resources were infinite, and it was in growth mode, enrichment mode. And so they were pretty much stripping the mountainside to get to gold and minerals. They were cutting down the trees. And Muir was the first one to sort of raise the voice and go, wait a minute, these trees took 2,000, 3,000 years to grow this big.
It's incredible that they were so ancient. These trees were so ancient, and they were just being cut down without any thought to preserving them.
Yeah, and they weren't even great for building. These giant sequoias have brittle wood that, they ended up being roof shingles or fence posts. So it was a tragic loss.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, wasn't President Lincoln the first president involved in protecting Yosemite? What did he do?
He was. During the Civil War, he made Yosemite Valley a state park.
Okay.
And Muir was there shortly after the Civil War. He was a sheep herder, and he was up on the mountainsides around the valley, and he saw the sheep, how they ate all the foliage. They didn't just eat the greenery, they rooted in and dug up the roots. And he realized that, look, if you let the sheep just go untrammeled here, they're going to destroy all the greenery up here. You're going to have erosion, the creeks are going to fill in, and it's going to destroy the valley. So that's when he started to realize, we need to protect this whole area, not just the valley. But Lincoln did save the valley during the Civil War, gave it to the state of California to protect. So it was a state park at that point.
Well, that's good. Who was Galen Clark? He was considered the original guardian of the valley.
Yeah, he was made the first, when Lincoln made it a state park, gave it to the state of California to preserve and protect for all people. Galen Clark was already there. He had moved in, he had a respiratory illness, and so he'd moved there to be out in nature, and he loved the place. He realized its magnificence, and Muir met him on his first trip in there. In fact, Galen Clark saved him, really gave him some bear meat to eat because it was winter and he was running out of food, and Clark was there to help him. But he was the first guardian of the valley, the official guardian of the valley, and he and Muir would become great friends. When Muir wanted to prove that it was glaciers that had created the valley, not some cataclysm that had dropped the bottom out, he and Clark went up into the mountains and nailed in spikes into the glacier and measured the movement and proved that.
Yeah, really scientific, yes. Well, now, didn't Muir say that Yosemite Valley was God's temple, and that is where you went to get close to God? But he owned a fruit ranch that had 40 to 50 people working on it. Was it profitable, and what did he do with that money?
Yeah, well, so Muir following his upbringing in this strict evangelical home,
Yes.
he was he had great spirituality, but he was a bit conflicted about the means. And so when he got out to Yosemite and he saw this magnificent landscape, he felt that this was God's greatest manifestation on Earth.
Earth, yes.
So he lived there for a while and started writing about it, became a great nature bard, but he also fell in love. And the woman he fell in love with, Louis Strenzel's family, had a fruit ranch at Martinez near San Francisco. So eventually Muir went to work there, and he was great at fruit ranching. He also understood how the water came from the Sierra Nevada and could tie in the protection of nature there with what went on the fruit ranch. And it was a wealthy place. His father-in-law had made good money. Muir would take that money and plow it back into the Sierra Club when he later helped found it and to fight our first environmental battles.
Isn't that great? So that was a productive use of the money. Now, tell us about Robert Underwood Johnson's trip to Yosemite to be in the mountains with Muir. Didn't they sleep by a campfire? I mean, did they even have a tent? Were they
Yeah.
What was it like?
No, they didn't have a tent.
No tent.
No. Muir was a very basic camper. He would take a loaf of bread and meat juice, believe it or not, which was a thing back then, and some coffee. Yeah, and go and camp for a week. And everybody who camped with him was like, "Oh God, Muir, his provisions are terrible, but he's brilliant, and you need to go see nature."
Well, did he have a sleeping bag?
No.
No sleeping.
He would take fronds of trees and just bend them down and sleep on them, or collect moss, or he slept on boulders sometimes in snaky areas. He was a pretty tough cat.
Yeah, he was. And so how did Robert Underwood think about that? I mean, he was pretty surprised, wasn't he?
Johnson went out there. He was actually doing a big series on the gold rush for Century Magazine, but he was already Muir's editor. He hadn't actually met him. This is 1889. So Muir says, "Well, you're out here. We're going to Yosemite. I want to show you the magnificence of it, but also how it's deteriorating because it's not being cared for well enough." So he takes Johnson out into Tuolumne Meadows, and they go down to what's called Muir Gorge.
Yes.
And
it was an eye-opening trip.
Yeah, they had an amazing conversation, and Johnson said, "Well, you're right, Muir. We need to save this. You write me 2 articles. I'm going to publish them in Century Magazine. Then I'm going to put them on every congressman's desk, and we're going to get a bill passed."
All right, on. You write that when Muir relocated to California, he met the notable poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, who rode into Yosemite with Eastern intellectuals and socialites in 1871. Well, describe their meeting and friendship.
Yeah, it's a few years back, after when Muir was just there, getting to know the valley. He was a guide, and he had a mentor who whenever somebody important from Harvard came out, there's like, "You need to go see John Muir in Yosemite Valley." Emerson was one of those people. She said, "You need to go find John Muir while you're out there." And so she wrote Muir a letter, and sure enough, the two got together, and Emerson realized what a great mind Muir had, and really admired him for living out in nature the way he would have liked to do.
Yes.
But he was getting older at that point.
Yes.
And his entourage kind of worried about him being
that
out
was
there.
That was what I thought was so interesting, that Ralph Waldo Emerson was surrounded by all these people, and they didn't want anyone to talk to him. They were trying to protect him, or it was almost like Muir somehow was able to get to him by inviting him out to camp with him or something, right? Didn't he? It was kind of a...
Well, he tried to get him to go camping, but Emerson's people wouldn't let him.
Yeah.
So, and Muir thought that was a great shame, because here's this great nature bard who inspired him, and the two definitely connected. You can see it in the conversations they had. And later Emerson said, "He's one of my guys."
Yes.
This guy, and he tried to get him to come out to Harvard as well, but Muir wouldn't go, because he's like, "The reason why you love me is because I'm out here in nature."
That's right. That's right. Before he owned the fruit farm, he became a shepherd with 1,800 sheep to manage, and aggressive wild hogs ruled at night. And he was in charge. He was a shepherd. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, he spent one particularly grueling winter as a shepherd, and with this massive flock that one person really couldn't control very well. He'd let them out, and they'd roam. And he'd have to go bring them back in. And it was a brutal winter, and many of them, over a couple nights, froze to death. And he realized the brutality of this industrial sheep herding, and he compares it to European sheep herding, where you have a shepherd who's been in a family where it's been an honored tradition, and it was a family thing, compared to this massive flock industrial type thing where somebody's getting rich, but it's really cruel to the animals.
Yes.
So that was
an eye-opening thing for him. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Now I read in your book that Muir, at 37 years old, wrote an article that was published in Harper's New Monthly magazine that highlighted his time in a blizzard on Mount Shasta, in a mountain in California. Can you give us some details on that blizzard?
Yeah, it's fair weather during the day, and he goes up in his shirt sleeves to take a scientific reading for a surveyor who was taking down some details about the place. And a blizzard comes in, and it's brutal. But they're fumaroles because it's volcanic, and fumaroles have steam coming up there. So in the middle of the blizzard, he goes and lies down on one of those.
And it saves him, really.
Yeah, he's frozen on top and burned on the bottom, but he survives.
He survives.
Yeah.
What an incredible man. And then what motivated John Muir to create the Sierra Club, which is a prominent American conservation organization? Because he also applauded women's involvement in the Sierra Club, because he wrote women college graduates should go camping in the mountains.
Yeah. Well, at first he wanted nothing to do with this. It was Johnson out on the East Coast who said, Muir, you need to start something out in California to raise money and raise awareness. I could do it here in New York, but you Californians don't wanting that, from the East Coast.
Sure.
So Muir says, wait a minute, I'm the guy who goes out in nature, I'm the writer, I'm that bard, I don't do organizations. So Johnson gets a bunch of professors from Berkeley and some professionals in San Francisco, says, have a meeting, you need to start up an organization and invite Muir. So they do. They invite Muir. Muir gets there, and what do? They elect him president. So that was 1892, and Muir came to treasure this role that he played and would stay president until his death in 1914. And it was all about, for Muir, bringing people to nature.
Yes.
The Sierra Club wasn't about protecting and keeping people out of nature. It was Muir's belief was that you found spiritual fulfillment there, and so he wanted to bring people to nature, and that's what it was about.
And of course, when people go out into nature, they appreciate it much more than just reading about it, right? You have to go out and experience it.
Exactly. You go experience it, you love it, then you'll protect it as well.
Then you'll protect it, exactly. Tell us about the plan Muir and Johnson decided on in 1889 to make their case for the formation of a national park called Yosemite, and Muir is now referred to as the father of national parks.
Yeah, when they went out on that camping trip, Johnson saw the place, and he was when I realized what this book was going to be about was when I saw that Muir brought the beauty of nature, the passion for nature to the people, and Johnson was able to actuate that, to get political results from it.
Isn't that great?
Yeah,
he did that.
And,
yes.
and so he went there and said, Muir, look, you write me these stories, I'm going to go down to Congress, I'm going to put on every congressman's desk, we're going to pass a bill to create Yosemite National Park, and that's what they did.
That's right, and so get people involved. Now tell us about when was Muir in demand on the public lecture circuit, and which one of his stories was the most popular?
Muir did not like speaking in front of an audience. He was a great raconteur and very funny in person. You took him to a dinner party, and he would tell great tales. And Johnson loved to take him around New York and
right.
introduce him to intellectuals and people with power so that they could get things done.
Sure.
He had gone out on a glacier in Alaska. A little dog had followed him. It was not his dog. It was somebody on the expedition with him. And that little dog, Stikine, proved to be a magnificent survivor because, again, Muir had a knack for getting lost in bad weather.
Sure.
A blizzard blew in, and they had to go back through. There was a fissure in the glacier they were on, and he had to carve his way down and go along the edge of the glacier, and somehow this little dog managed to follow him and survive the ordeal with him, and he fell in love with that dog and wrote an amazing tale about it. So that was probably his most fun and popular story.
And there are so many dog lovers in this country that I'm sure they love that. Now tell us about the work of President Cleveland, then President then President McKinley to create 2 new national parks, Mount Rainier and Grand Canyon, and more forest reserves in 6 western states.
Well, here again, it's the work of Muir and Johnson together. They created the Yosemite National Park, and then Muir raises the alarm about the sequoias, in the trees, and Johnson gets involved with creating something called the Forestry Commission.
Forestry Commission, okay.
Yes, and which was put together to look at all our forests and go, how do we do this? How our forests are getting cut down rapidly, and so they went around the country and they said, look, we need to preserve these trees. 21 million acres worth of trees that they wanted to set aside. And Muir was kind of the spiritual leader of the Forestry Commission. He traveled with them and
Isn't that great?
and influenced them. And so this commission recommended that, and then Cleveland was president, and there was a lot of politics going on. The western states where these forests were didn't necessarily want that to happen. So Muir wrote a story about the American forest and really created what was a creation myth of our forest. He talked about how God had created these magnificent forests and they were the best forests in the world, and that the settlers came and were cutting them down, and really made a case for saving these forests to be farmed, to be so that we could keep our best forests in national parks, but there was enough forest land because Muir did work in factories. He worked in a factory where he made shovel handles and broom handles,
yes.
And he realized that this was also valuable to mankind, and that we needed to use the forest both for these kinds of uses, but also spiritual uses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was interesting to read that there were many that opposed the creation of national parks and forest reservations in America. I mean, even New York's Central Park was violently opposed in the beginning. I was so surprised to read that in your book. And what changed the public perception that parks were important and positive for the country?
Yeah, this was a new concept.
It was a new concept.
Really, when Lincoln saved Yosemite Valley during the Civil War, that was a first.
Yes.
Governments didn't save,
anything.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. So, Muir partly with the Sierra Club, and as you pointed out, taking women out there to see it, and it was liberating to them. They hadn't been a big part of nature in that way for pleasure and spiritual fulfillment, and so there was a grassroots movement. There were clubs, women's clubs, garden clubs, professors around the country. It was the beginning of a time when instead of just trying to protect something in your backyard, it was people, maybe a club in Florida, trying to save Yosemite Valley and
as a public space,
exactly.
for everyone to enjoy.
Exactly, a whole new concept, and Central Park was a big part of that. It was a big success.
Big success. And your book has great presidential history because you wrote that in 1901, President William McKinley was shot in a concert hall in Buffalo, New York, and died a week later. And the Vice President, Theodore Roosevelt, was the amateur naturalist, writer, and rancher, was sworn in as president at the age of 42. I never knew he was a rancher. And now, how did the Roosevelt administration handle the water problem that, when the mayor of San Francisco was determined to get that water from Yosemite?
That's a good question, the bottom which we may never get to, because Roosevelt, he had a lot of pulls, right? He loved nature, but he also was the president, and he had politics,
yes.
and so in some ways he and Muir and Johnson were doing one thing. He also had Gifford Pinchot, who was our first forester and was kind of the president's right-hand man on the environment, and he was fighting to allow a piece of Yosemite National Park to be dammed and made a reservoir for San Francisco. So Roosevelt was working both sides a little bit, as a president probably has to always,
Right. Keep everybody happy.
Yeah, and you can't do that. But I think in spirit, Roosevelt didn't want to give up that piece of the park, and several secretaries of the Interior and presidents had said, San Francisco, you can't have this part of the national park, even though we know you need a water supply, get it somewhere else. Then there was the great earthquake and fire in 1906, and all of a sudden, San Francisco had this political capital, and they cashed it in, and Congress said, okay, you can have the water rights there.
Exactly.
We need to do something for you, and that was it.
Whoa. And tell us about the 3 times that Muir went camping with President Roosevelt. Was it basically the two of them sleeping outside, out without a tent in Northern California, right? They're just walking around.
Yeah. When Roosevelt went on his whistle-stop tour well, it was his first election. I can't say re-election because he became president after the assassination, but for his election to a second term, he had to go through the West on a whistle-stop tour. He was stopping in every little town, shaking hands and giving speeches, and by the time he got out to Yosemite Valley, he was like, I don't want to give another speech. I want to go out with John Muir. We're going camping for 3 days and nobody else is going to bother us. And so those guys bonded during that time. They had very different views on some things. Roosevelt loved to hunt and shoot animals, and Muir didn't like that and sort of lectured him on it. But I think Roosevelt really loved the fact that Muir would stand up to him.
Yeah, I bet.
And so they became very close on that 3-day camping trip in Yosemite Valley.
That's so cool. Now, you did write about the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, where more than 400,000 people were affected because they were living in San Francisco, and that had a magnitude of 7.8, and there was property damage ranged to $500 million back then, I guess. What was the impact of the quake on John Muir?
Well, his home all the way over in Martinez, well, it's about 30 miles away. For the earthquake, it was a big earthquake. That was, it rattled the house and the chimney, but he wasn't there exactly. But for him, of course, San Francisco was devastated. There were, many deaths and many homeless, and it impacted Yosemite Valley, because there had been a private monopoly for water in San Francisco, and that had really held the city hostage. These people were making a lot of money on the fresh water, and so the city wanted to dam up Hetch Hetchy, which is a valley very much like Yosemite, just to the north of it in Yosemite National Park. And so they finally, when this happened, they were able to go to Congress and say, we want the water rights to that valley, and Congress finally acquiesced and gave them a piece of the park. Muir lost this battle for that piece of the park. He'd win the war, because a little bit later, the National Park Service would be created to make all the national parks inviolable so that entities couldn't come do that. Right,
which was so great. And unfortunately, our time is ending at the studio, and what a great discussion we've had today with Dean King and his marvelous book. And where can our viewers find your book to purchase it or to get it?
It's great to be here with you, Lois, and they can find it at my website or online at any good independent or national bookstore, hopefully in their community and libraries.
Now, when was it published?
Oh, it was published in March of 2023.
So it's very modern, very current.
Yeah, just out. I've been on tour pretty much since then.
Great that you were with us today. And thank you so much for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.